Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. This is a special remote segment being recorded poolside at the LAX Marriott Bonvoy. It is day 2 of the 3-day Gallifrey One convention, and I am joined by a very special guest.
Hello, it's Conrad Westmus here. Yes, I'm in actual America. It's unbelievable. We're literally by the pool. There's palm trees. I can just see a robed master, Time Lord, around. I've had my photograph taken with 3 different Perrys.
As we exited the hotel to the outside pool, we ran into Perrycon. 3 different fans, all dressed as Perry from Attack of the Cybermen.
It was a panoply of Perrys. It was most perplexing.
It was a panopticon of Perrys.
It was a panopticon of... I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry. I've been talking too much for the last couple of days. I've got no words.
And one of the Colin Baker cosplayers gave you his Colin Baker jacket to wear for 2 of those 3 photos.
That was absolutely a moment. I was asked, so basically I've since, through some sort of administrative error, I seem to have the wrong lanyard, and I've got access to the green room, autographs room, all sorts of exciting things. And I was asked on stage about what would I like Kerry's, my character in Big Finish, to play, or what would like our characters to do. And I said, well, as he changes colour, I'd like to defect from the 8th Doctor to the 6th Doctor and see what happens when a colour-changing lizard meets Colin Baker. That is a migraine waiting to happen.
My head hurts just thinking about it.
I know, but books-wise, because this is a books podcast, I am delighted, because it was on this very podcast I heard the trauma about your lost New Adventures trauma. Sorry for your loss. We'll have a moment's silence for that at home. Please pause and have 2 minutes silence for Jason's lost New Adventures collection. But you have good news.
So I discovered the books had been lost due to somebody else's administrative error about 2.5 years ago. And I've been collecting. I've purchased several on eBay, which are available for under face value.
Okay.
Bought them for $6 and now sold for $5. That's many of them.
Forgive my ignorance, roughly how many books are we talking?
There are 61 new adventures from John Peel's Time Worm Genesis in June of 1991 up through Lance Parkin's The Dying Days in April 1997. Now, the NAs continued for 2.5 years as a non-Doctor Who line, starring Bernie Summerfield and a host of original characters. I am not collecting those. I left the NAs at about that point because I follow the man in the blue box. So I'm collecting the first 61, and I had 54 recollected. My friend Dale in the dealer's room is looking out for me and is finding NAs for me, and I got 5 of the last 7. I am only missing now The Left-Handed Hummingbird by Kate Orman and Lance Parkin's Just War. And a friend of mine who is here, who is thinking about downsizing their collection, has offered to send me those 2 gratis if she can find them in her house. So I may, by the end of the month, I may have all 61 new adventures back in my possession again, and I will never, ever let go of them.
No. Now, how are we going to be containing and storing these things now? Just on your shelf regularly, or are you going to put them in sealed plastic boxes somewhere in a vault?
I have been selling off my 2 Entertained Doctor Who DVDs and replacing it with the Blu-ray collections. And the Blu-ray collections take up much less shelf space, and I am selling off and not replacing my new series DVDs.
Awesome.
So the new adventures will live where the DVDs used to live. All right, at this point, I am wanted downstairs. Your boy is on 2 panels this weekend. I am on a panel in about 9 minutes, talking about Season 7, Doctor Who's first full-color season. And then tomorrow I am moderating the Christopher H. Bidmead Memorial panel because I did a Trap 1 episode on Chris Bidmead and a Doctor Who Lit on Chris Bidmead. So when Sean, the showrunner here, was looking for volunteers to be on panels, I'm like, Sean, give me the Bidmead panel. I got this.
Excellent. I mean, you've got all that. You are born in the game. You're probably one of the most rehearsed and expert Program D panelists in here.
I am a novice. This is the 36th Gallifrey One. This is only my 10th. There are folks who have been here coming every year since 1990. So I am a clueless newbie.
You're a clueless newbie. I'm literally a virgin. And it was interesting walking around not literally a virgin. I'm literally a galley virgin. But when I went around they do these sort of speed dating events, the evening receptions, where you kind of go as a guest. You go around 10 tables of 10 Doctor Who fans for 5 minutes each, and it is kind of exhausting. But I asked them, was anyone here new? And it was about 5 of us were new out of 100. One thing about Galley is that people come back. This is my 10th time here. The first time I was living here. The other 9 I've been traveling cross country from New York to get here. There are people. This is a family and a lifestyle for a lot of folks. All right, Conrad, it has been a pleasure seeing you, my friend. Absolute pleasure. It was London. Now it's LAX. Where next time?
New York City.
Deal. We've literally just shaken hands.
It is a deal. On the other side of the break. Well, I was going to toss it over to Jim Sangster for this week's interview. Just a couple of preliminary notes, however, before I do that. First of all, apologies for this episode being a week late. Second of all, the previous episode, 3 weeks ago as you hear this, was episode 138A, The Nightmare Fair. I am now going to play for you a song, an original song by Ian Potter, who was originally slated to be my guest for that episode. Sadly, as I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, I did lose my spreadsheet of upcoming guests for the last season of Doctor Who Lit when Smudge destroyed my hard drive. I also lost some segments of episodes from the Doctor Who Lit archive, although fortunately the completed copies of all the episodes survive. Anyway, Ian was supposed to be my guest, but I did not know that, so he was not on the episode. However, I am pleased to release a song that Ian wrote for me about the Nightmare Fair about 18 months ago, which I had also lost when Smudge destroyed my hard drive. Ahem. In a moment, we will have Ian Potter's song, and then this week's episode proper. I've now been home from Gallifrey One for a couple of weeks. There are only 2 more Gallifrey One conventions left. The last one is slated to be in 2028. Always a remarkable experience being at the convention, 3 days of non-stop socializing. I know Conrad had a great time, and there are 3 special Trap One episodes, all live convention reports, one with Conrad solo and the other 2 with Conrad and myself. Those are over on Trap One. As I've mentioned a couple of times before in this podcast, there's a couple of different ways to experience Gallifrey One. During the day are the events, which are interviews with the main stage guests, as well as fan-run panels. I was on 2 different fan panels this past Galley convention. And there's also the evening activities at the convention. There is the dance party, the karaoke room is open every night, and the audience at the dance party and the karaoke tends to be much younger than the typical convention crowd upstairs, so it's a very different experience after hours. Now, my religious practice in real life tends to be virtually non-existent except for the major holidays. One thing I try to do at Galley every year is on Friday night they have a Shabbat service for the Jewish guests, and I have to say, of all the panels that I went to, this was the most crowded one of all. This event basically filled up every seat in the room that it was assigned to, not even the smallest room at the convention. Again, with a very young and enthusiastic crowd that put my meager religious observance to shame. I try to do this every year, which is funny because I rarely set foot in synagogue, except of course for the high holy days. So just one more event that makes Gallifrey a very special convention, and if you have not been yet and you're able to get to Los Angeles, I highly recommend you attend at least one of the last 2 galleys in February 27 and February 28. Meanwhile, over to you, Ian Potter.
Are you going to the Nightmare Fair? Ghastly place throws Perry in minds. Descend the steep roller coaster there. A curious man dreams they're doing crimes. You'll see less steel in the things he makes here. Celestial toys and silicon guys. Accidentally occidental no more. He hangs round arcades just to kill time.
Well, hi everybody, and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. My name is Jason. Joining me, as always, is my co-host Jim Sangster. How are you, Jim?
Sagacity, I'm very well.
Long-time listeners of the podcast will know that Doctor Who Literature is the work of one person. And that one person is joining me today, Jim Sangster. If it was not for Jim Sangster, the lights would be off and this podcast would not be recording right now. Jim is responsible for all of the music. He is responsible for any good idea that I have, and he is responsible for the YouTube channel. I merely show up, read a script, and I say goodnight. So, Jim, I could literally not do the show without you. Thank you very much for all the value you have added in making sure that Doctor Who Literature, the final season, is actually in production.
Usually I'll be far too modest and I'll be cringing and trying to make a joke. But the fact that I actually came up with a strategy of how we could bring this back, make it manageable, and not go mad for the final series, I think I'll take the compliment. Thank you. Yeah. I'm really happy with the fact that I did this because we spoke all through last year. Neither of us were particularly in a position to do a podcast. And then we found a way of making it work. So for those people who have enjoyed my little musical silliness, I can now confirm that there will be a song for every Sylvester McCoy book, as well as a few additional bonuses along the way. And one of the earliest ones I made is actually coming in a few weeks' time for The Chase. And then one of the most recent ones I've done will be for Dalek's Master Plan. And there are animations for all of these, which you can find on the YouTube channel, where I've just also published the missing scene from the Target version of The Web of Fear. So for those of you who always wanted to see how it looked for the Brigadier, well, Lethbridge Stewart and the Doctor meeting in the tunnels, I've now made an animation, and it seems to have gone down quite well.
And as an editorial comment, I'll point out that in 1968, people who worked on Doctor Who actually knew what a colonel was, whereas people who work on the new series believe that a colonel is somebody who stands sentry in an empty room, the time window. Or they believe that colonels lay in airstrikes to the RAF. But that is going off on a tangent, and one of the things Jim asked me to do for this Doctor Who at the final season is to stop going off on tangents. So I will forcibly drag myself back on topic. I will not say bad things about the new series. Jim, we are here this week to talk about the final part of the Trial of a Time Lord novelization cycle, which has taken about as long to discuss on Doctor Who literature as it took to publish all 4 books. If I remember correctly, when Tony Witt covered this on the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the Mindwarp manuscript came in a day late, and by a day I mean about a year late.
I think that's right, yeah. But they learned their lesson with Varos because I think Philip Martin is the style of writer where he loves the sound of deadlines whooshing over his head. So that's going to be my first name drop of this particular episode, because when I first joined Doctor Who fandom in Liverpool in 1985, this would have been, or maybe early 86. It must be early 86. Philip Martin was a guest at the Merseyside local group, and he was foreshadowing his next story. He said he's doing another one with Syl, and because Syl is from a race of mutants, his boss has an ever-expanding brain, and the story is about trying to find a new case for the brain. So we found that out months before we got to the episodes and understood how it would fit into the stories. But because I love monsters, the first thing I did was I'd already made a little plasticine Syl in the scale of the Tom Baker Dennis Fisher doll. So then I had to make a Kiv, and I didn't know what Kiv looked like, so I just made a Syl with a massive bloated brain. So when I saw the Kiv on the TV with the slight bumps on his head, I thought, that's not quite what I was expecting. I was a little bit disappointed.
Now, 2 weeks ago on Doctor Who Literature, we covered the episode The Nightmare Fair, which is the first of the 3 quote-unquote missing season 23 stories. And that's a little bit of timey-wiminess. Because we are recording this out of sequence, I have not recorded 1 second of that episode yet. But as you listen to this playback, that episode has already been recorded, completed, and aired 2 weeks ago. But there was a second book in the missing episodes, the missing season 23 cycle, which will be coming out a little bit later on Doctor Who Literature. And that is Mission to Magnus, which is also by Philip Martin and also features Syl. Would he have talked about that with you in 1985 at the Merseyside group, or was that after that script had already fallen through and before it was turned into a novelization several years later?
This would have been after it had fallen through and before he'd been commissioned to write the book, I think. Because I'm not sure if... I think we knew he would have been writing something for The Missing season 23, but all of our attention was on the one that was actually going to be made. So I seem to remember that there was a lot of talk about a show he made called Gangsters, which at the time, I was only 15 years old when this story came out. So I wouldn't have seen Gangsters. And having now seen it, I know it would have been completely inappropriate for me to have seen it back then. Because when I say I was 15, I was both very immature and very obnoxious and precocious. So that worst mix of a mid-teen kid. If you've not seen Gangsters, it started off as a one-off play for the Play to Today slot. And that was a slot which pulled from different regions of the BBC. And so Gangsters is set in the Midlands, in Birmingham. It's got a very multicultural cast of actors who are not necessarily the most experienced, because it was very difficult for non-white actors to get roles. But one of the lead roles was played by the actor who played Latoni in Black Orchid. And another of the lead characters was Alister Parsons, who played Matrona Carney in this. What I would say is Gangsters is deeply racist. And I'm not saying that Philip Martin was, because Philip Martin, from everything I can tell, was very progressive, and he was trying to write things for characters who wouldn't normally be seen on TV. And it's more that the characters themselves are very racist, and so he doesn't shy away from that. In the same way that in Varos, it's about violence, so it is violent. But Gangsters also had this very kind of breaking the fourth wall thing, which creeps in very slowly, but in the second series, the whole thing falls apart. Philip Martin himself appears as a character who's playing W.C. Fields. And the final shot of the whole two series run is the cast walking off the set, and the camera follows them, breaking the fourth wall as you see the cameras and the production crew, just to reveal that this was all a production. And that kind of works with Varos in that it's about the making of TV as well as being TV. And in Mindwarp, we get a similar sort of thing where we get the audience, i.e. the trial, watching the story unfold on a screen. So it's still quite sort of thematically consistent with his previous work on Doctor Who. I'm just going to... I know I said I wasn't going to preempt any of the things that other people are going to say about season 23. I'm just going to say, no matter what you might think of the season 23 we got, it was infinitely better than the one they were planning. Certainly based on the books that we get. So that makes me even more grateful for the fact that we get this final Trial of a Time Lord book. And spoilers, I really like it.
So when you were sitting there listening to Philip Martin in Liverpool, speaking of name dropping, I imagine one of the other fans in that group would have been a very young Chris Chibnall.
Yes. And when this story came out, I've mentioned this before, I think. So me, Chris, and our friend Daniel Adams had been given the job of interviewing the guests at a Liverpool convention. And the interviews would be published in the group fanzine. And we'd originally divided up all the guests, so each of us would go and interview a selection of the guests so we could get coverage. Then something happened. So the convention was the week after Mindwarp finished. How to tell this in the right order? Okay, so Mindwarp finished on the Saturday. On the Tuesday, Ian Marter died. and Ian Marter was due to be a guest at this convention. So when we found this out, we decided we were just going to see how many interviews we could do, and we'd do them as a trio. I might have mentioned this on a previous episode, but it was heartbreaking to hear Ian Marter's friend Nick Courtney announce his death at the convention. So that already put a little bit of a shadow on the event. Just to make it a bit lighter, the event was taking place in the Adelphi Hotel, it looks very grand, but then you knock on the marble and realize it's wood. But a few things happened at this event. On the Friday before the event, the Friday night before the event, there was a man called Toby Chamberlain who used to be a costume maker, and he'd often make costumes based on the original molds of Doctor Who costumes, but he was also very good at recreating so accurate the costumes, and he brought along a load of costumes for this convention. I ended up inside a Sea Devil. A person who I later found out was the writer Steve Berry was in the Sontaran, and a very tall, very well-spoken man called Nick played the cyber controller as we walked around the hotel, Nick being Nicholas Pegg.
Oh.
So the three of us were going around the hotel. Part of the convention aspiration was to raise money for charity. So we had collecting tins as we just gate crashed loads of parties that were going on in this hotel. One of the parties was a wedding. And I'm led to believe by Steve Berry that one of the guests at this wedding was a writer called Alan Bleasdale. And he later wrote a satirical political drama called GBH, in which, in one episode, the lead character, played by Robert Lindsay, has a nervous breakdown in a hotel where a Doctor Who convention was happening.
I won't pretend that I've heard of the show, but that is a great hook.
It gets weirder. So I left the Liverpool Doctor Who group and joined another group. And we put some flyers in the Tourist Information Centre in Liverpool, and it had my phone number on it. And that was how I got a phone call from the production team of GBH, asking if I knew anyone who had Doctor Who costumes. Now, I did. I put them in touch with a group who are known as the Hyde Fundraisers. They do a lot of, if ever you see Doctor Who costumes on other TV shows, and if they haven't come from the BBC storeroom, they've come from the Hyde Fundraisers. They've raised thousands of pounds for charity, and they're a great bunch, and they've got amazing costumes, and they're still raising money today. Like in a few weeks' time, there's going to be an event in Manchester or around Manchester that they're going to be raising money for. So I was able to put them in touch with the production team, and I think they actually played the monsters in this TV show. So the event that I helped to inspire, I also helped to get produced in a really weird way.
Speaking of production, when you and I were talking during the pre-show, we were trying to recall when the box set for Trial of a Time Lord, the original box set, came out, which in my recollection was sometime in 2008 or 2009. One of the 4 DVDs in that box set, of course, concerned Trial of a Time Lord parts 5 through 8, or as we know it better, Mindwarp, as it's called in novelization format. And I'm glad that I have you on as a guest for the Mindwarp episode, because not only are you the beating heart of this podcast, you are also a professional Mindwarp commentator, having appeared on the DVD box set.
Accidentally, yeah. It was a funny thing. Another thing, when Doctor Who was off the air, people used to claim that there was a fan mafia in the UK. And there was. There really was. There was a group of people who'd meet once a month at the Fitzroy Tavern. And within that group, there would be people who were creators. And a lot of people who were there were people who'd written for the Virgin books. And I don't just mean the Doctor Who books. I was the writer or co-writer of 3 books for Virgin's TV and film range. And so one of the books I wrote was about Martin Scorsese. I co-wrote a book about Alfred Hitchcock, and I co-wrote 2 volumes about the sitcom Friends. So we got used to not only writing books and also writing for magazines, but also doing TV to promote these things. So I'd been on TV to promote the Hitchcock book, and I'd done quite a bit of that. And so when I think it was Ed Stradling initially was looking for talking heads, and at that point, Trial of a Time Lord wasn't very popular.
Huh.
But I said
Not
to
to put
him,
to find a point on it.
I'd already done a couple of talking heads for him, but I said I'd really love to do Trial of a Time Lord because I want to represent the people who aren't with us anymore, mainly J&T. Because I guessed, quite correctly as it turned out, the kind of talking heads he would be able to already get. And I'll be able to guess the viewpoints they would have. So my plan was I would go in there and try to think from the point of view of J&T and take his side where it's possible. What I didn't know was that I was recorded in isolation, and they were recording over a few days. Clayton Hickman from Doctor Who magazine and the person who designed the DVD covers recorded on a separate day. But because we've got a similar sort of sense of humour, the producer was able to, and I think it was Steve Broster by this point, he was able to edit the 2 of us so we're almost like a double act.
That's right. I vividly remember that.
So when you've got, sometimes I'll be setting up a joke and Clayton will deliver it. I think there's one point where we're talking about the fact that all of the cliffhangers, most of the cliffhangers end with a zoom in on Colin Baker's face.
That's
and then
right.
it just cuts to Clayton doing the exact facial expression, But I would say there was, obviously we talked a lot. Each of us talked a lot, and a lot of stuff was cut out. And I think that they took a slightly, let's say, safe route, because there was one thing I said that didn't make it to the final episode, and I think I touched on this a little bit with when we did the Vervoids episode, was I mentioned that Philip Martin was very much about a multicultural society. And sometimes you get directors who go multicultural. Matthew Robinson was very good with that. But quite often Doctor Who was a very white show. And when you've got 3 stories like Trial of a Time Lord, and all 3 of them are set in a future, like the Earth's future. So even if they're not set on Earth, they're set in a time that is the future to Earth. And you get, it's a bit like the Richard Pryor joke where he was watching Logan's Run and he just noticed, where are the brothers? Do you guys know something we don't? There are no black people in the future according to this film, And when you get Mysterious Planet and you've got the survivors of Earth, and they're very white. And you might say, well, that's because they're underground and they're supposed to have, and they don't really want to complicate it by having anyone who's not white, but that's a bit of a cop-out. Because Planet of the Apes managed it. The humans who survived there, they had black members of that society as well.
Right.
And then you get the Vervoid story, and everyone's white on this futuristic luxury liner. And in the middle, you've got a story which is multicultural, and every non-white face is a slave. And you've also got Brian Blessed, who is kind of appropriating an Oriental persona. Right. Thankfully, he doesn't go into it with an accent, but there's a lot about Ikanos, which is supposed to be Asian.
The makeup is definitely leaning in. I hadn't thought about that consciously, but now that you say it, I can see it in my mind's eye.
But what that also leads us to is that Mindwarp, or the middle bit of Trial of a Time Lord, does have a really nice multicultural cast. I mean, you've got Nabil Shaban in there, obviously. Alibi Parsons, I mentioned before, she'd been in Gangsters. Trevor Laird as the guard, Frax, the lead guard. And of course, we see him later on in Doctor Who because he's Martha Jones's dad.
That's right.
And more recently, he's been in a few episodes of Ted Lasso. And Gordon Warnaker as Tuza. I think he's still mostly famous for Hanif Qureshi's My Beautiful Laundrette. But you've got a lot of this, and also like Richard Hartley's music, which is, I think, the best thing of the entire season, personally, leans into a kind of Indian flavour as well. And it really does feel like a completely different show to the ones either side of it. I think I am now a bit of a trial apologist. I've kind of had to be. And it was largely thanks to the efforts of Chris Chibnall and Daniel Adams. Chris, even as a 16-year-old, was rewriting the story in his head and trying to make it make sense. And Daniel was just trying to find the funniest way to represent the story, which led to him doing Trial of a Time Lord in 14 minutes, where he played every part and just laid into the stupidity of the whole show. And that was what made me fall in love with the show, not what was actually broadcast on television.
You had mentioned, of course, that there's the infamous extra feature on the Trial box set, which has Chris Chibnall appearing on a different television show and going face-to-face with Pip and Jane Baker about perceived deficiencies in the Terror of the Vervoid script. And, of course, that led to a lot of unfair jokes about Chris Chibnall when he became showrunner. But from my understanding, and you may have mentioned this before, he was not actually giving his own point of view during that recording.
That's true, yeah. I mean, it might have been his point of view as well, but he was representing the feelings of the group. And it's so frustrating. You know, as I say, I was a precocious little kid, and I really wanted to be in that group who went to that TV studio, because I was in Liverpool and the TV studio was up the road in Manchester, 30 miles away. But I couldn't get the day off school. And Chris was a year older than me. So he and a few others were able to go. And Chris had been we'd had a group meeting that Saturday. We'd all watched the final episode. And Chris just listened to everyone's feelings of it. So this was the Monday morning after the trial season had finished. And our wounds are fresh. And John Nathan Turner, very cleverly, wasn't there, but he'd sent a statement. But he'd sent Pip and Jane Baker to represent the production. We now know, and me and Chris have spoken about it, and we've realised the cruelty of asking them to represent a show that they pretty much saved. If they hadn't been able to bash together those 6 episodes to finish off the season, it could have all fallen apart. And what they did, I think, was as coherent as they could make it. But so we now realise how much on a knife edge that show was, how many other scripts had been rejected, and they just made something that could be made, whereas so many other writers weren't even getting that far. They couldn't put together a story that could actually be constructed in a BBC studio. So yeah, it's probably quite cruel that they took the flak for it, but at the time, we thought they were the worst things ever. We thought they destroyed our beloved Doctor Who. It surprised me greatly when the Mindwarp episodes were not universally the most popular episodes in fandom. I was absolutely blown away that the Vervoid story ended up being voted the most popular in Doctor Who magazine. Because for me, Mindwarp has a lot of the stuff that I watch Doctor Who for. It's got monsters. It's got a little bit of comedy. A rare thing in this season, it has got a threat of violence. And a lot of what they talk about is quite horrific. Even though we don't see like a big bloody operation, we're told about it, and we see a little pulsating brain, and we get a sense of what might be happening. We also get a companion who's I mean, her hair in this season is beautiful. It's so bouncy, and she looks gorgeous, And then they shave her head. That's a massive violation. It's I think that for all of its faults, and I know that there are plenty, I think that the Mindwarp episodes are the most successful at achieving what they're trying to do. And they're also still pushing the boundaries in terms of the visual effects with the paint box recoloring of the sea and the sky and all that. I think it was too oversaturated. If ever I'm watching that, I always turn the colour down a little bit, and it looks perfect. But they were trying something new, and I really love it for that.
See, as fans, we are watching the show in the moment. We are watching it at the moment that it is broadcast on the surface level. And some of us will stick around and read the closing credits after the episode ends, but these are just names on a screen, and you don't really understand the interplay between a writer and a script editor and a director and a designer and a makeup artist and a camera operator. There are significant issues with the cohesion of the trial season, which you would watch episode 8. Episode 8 doesn't make sense. Oh, it must be Philip Martin's fault. Episode 14 is not the way that I personally would have ended the season. That must be Pip and Jane Baker's fault. What none of us would have known watching Trial of a Time Lord as it goes out, which is autumn 1986 in the UK, and then for me in the New York City suburbs on PBS 12 months later, you wouldn't have known that they started to film the season without any idea of how the season was going to end. You would not have known that Robert Holmes died in the middle of composing the script for parts 13 and 14. You would not have known that Eric Sayward took his ball and went home in the middle of production. You would not have known about all the scripts that fell through and how Pip and Jane Baker wrote the entirety of episodes 9, 10, 11, 12, and 14 basically overnight on the back of an envelope. And the fact that these are good, competent, four-cornered scripts with characters and jokes is actually pretty impressive given the colossal time constraints that they were under. And then Eric Sayward leaves the show over the idea that he wants season to end on a cliffhanger, which is one of the worst ideas in the long, sad history of bad ideas. Would have destroyed any audience goodwill built up over the return of the show. So having the original Part 14 script, which is available as an extra on the Blu-ray box set, and I've read it. I encourage everyone else who hasn't to watch that on the or to read it on the BD-ROM. Pip and Jane's script for Part 14 is much better than the eventual Eric Sayward script was had it been filmed, which it was not. So getting back to Mindwarp, nobody seems to know what was going on. Colin Baker has told the story over and over again that he went to the director and said, is the doctor lying in the scene or is he brainwashed? And the director said, I don't know, talk to the writer. And the writer said, I don't know, talk to the script editor. So Colin Baker didn't really have a sense of what actually was going on. And then at the end of Part 8, Perry is seemingly killed, and it isn't until a 30-second clip at the end of Part 14 that you learn, no, she didn't actually die, but you guys are going to spend 6 weeks in real time thinking that the character of Perry is dead so soon after the death of Adric. And then, of course, that is quickly walked back. In the novelization of The Ultimate Foe, you get a different explanation as to what happens to Perry than you do at the end of the Mindwarp novelization. It's amazing that this season even went out as broadcast, given the incredible behind-the-scenes headwinds. So there's a lot to like about Mindwarp and Terror of the Vervoids, but fandom takes it the wrong way because they think all the problems are entirely down to the writer, when in fact the writers were the least culpable people in the whole affair.
This is why, another reason why I wanted to represent JNT's point of view, because I think I say on the DVD, Eric Sayward was right from his point of view. You want to make it the most dramatic thing you possibly can, and to kind of ape the ending of Sherlock Holmes is a great way of ending the season. It's a fun way of ending the season. John Nathan Turner is entirely right as the producer to go, I don't want to give the bosses an easy way out. If you write the best ending to the show, they'll end the show. And I'd quite like to have a job at the end of this year. But just to work out the timeline, the point at which Philip Martin is speaking to Eric Sayward about what is going on is the point when Eric Sayward has given up. He might not have decided to walk right at that moment, but he's already given up because he's already lost the battle in many ways. He's lost the energy to fight. He's lost Robert Holmes, who he'd grown close to. And What he should have been doing is working out how to make this all work, but he'd given up. Now, I'm reminded of, I don't think this would ever happen very often. I'm reminded of I, Claudius. And I'm thinking of that because Brian Blessed is in this, and he was magnificent in I, Claudius. But the director of I, Claudius was approached by Brian Blessed going on in the first episode, I don't know what's going on. And Sean Phillips approached him and said, I don't understand who I am. And then they went away and thought about it, and then they came back, and Brian Blessed went, this is Rome. I'm the head of the mafia. And the director goes, I'm so glad you worked that out. Don't tell everyone else because it might affect the processes, but you stick with that. And as a consequence, Brian Blessed realizes, I'm the head of the mafia. I don't need to shout. If I whisper, people will listen because I am going to be a god when I die. And the point when he raises his voice and does a Brian Blessed is the most heartbreaking moment of the whole show. And it's probably the last time Brian Blessed acted. Because after then, he's just required to do Brian Blessed. So we've already had Flash Gordon with Gordon's alive. And I might have mentioned before, by the way, every man in the UK can do a Brian Blessed impression, whether they succeed or not. They've already had Blackadder, the first series of The Blackadder, where Brian Blessed is playing Brian Blessed as the king. And we've got King Yrcanos, where he's playing Brian Blessed. By the way, Sean Phillips, he told her it was a Jewish comedy. And she went, okay. And that's how she played her role as the Queen of Rome. If Eric Saywood had had any wit about him or any ability, he might have been able to play this by saying to Philip Martin, tell Colin to play it as if it's real. Tell Michael Jason to play it as if it's a lie. Tell everyone else to be as inconsistent as possible to help sell the lie. But he's given up. He's not thinking like that. He's not thinking like a fan, basically. But with just a little bit of a realization, he could have made it good. What I love about the novel is we've already got the TV show. So the novel is Philip Martin going, this is what I think happened. And we know this because of how ludicrous the ending is with what happens to Perry. Because Philip Martin is a dramatist who wants to be a comedy writer. Whereas like Stephen Moffat is a comedy writer who's ended up being a dramatist. So this book gives us a version of events. And like a lot of the really good Target books, that just means that you get a viewpoint. It doesn't necessarily mean this is what was happening on TV. It just means from the viewpoint of this narrator, this is what happened.
Your comment about dramatists who want to be comedy writers and comedy writers who want to be dramatists reminds me of what Darren Mooney said about Brad Pitt over on the 250 podcast, and that Brad Pitt is a character actor trapped in the body of a movie star.
Yeah. That works, yeah.
Which explains a lot of Brad Pitt's acting roles over the years where he... I'm not going to chase that thought to its logical conclusion, but I don't think Brad Pitt is ever credited for the quality of work that he does because he's so attractive when he does it, you're not paying attention to his acting technique. Whereas...
I'm desperately trying to think of an equivalent in this story. The Rock, maybe. Hey, I'll tell you one thing. When we were watching it, and we were all really disappointed that once again, the turgid Ron Jones had been given a director job. Because he'd got this kind of fan reputation. You know, we'd had Black Orchid, which is quite staid, really. There's nothing really spectacular about it. We've got Time Flight, and of course we can blame the director for that. Arc of Infinity, let's blame the director for that. Frontiers is good, but we forget that because we're still wounded about Time Flight. So when we found out he was directing Mindwarp, we were like, is he ever going to go away? And this is his last story for Doctor Who. I think it's his best. And I think the thing that possibly sent him over the edge was, and I'm going to name drop again, right? So at that convention, one of the other people that we interviewed was Nabil Shaban. So we got to speak to him a week after Mindwarp had gone out. We were very gushing. Turns out he's a Doctor Who fan. We asked him, what was your favourite memory as a child of watching Doctor Who? And he grew up in a children's home. They wouldn't let him watch Doctor Who, so he threw a massive tantrum until he got his own way. And that was how he was able to watch the Dalek invasion of Earth. I'm going to do a mild little swear, so if you want to protect tiny ears, if you're listening in the car, it's coming up in a second. Nabil Shaban said, I loved the Daleks, but the thing that really put the shits at me was the slither. And we hadn't seen the original Dalek invasion of Earth at this point. So we had no idea what it would look like. And I'm just going to leave that hanging. So obviously, when we've seen Dalek invasion of Earth and we see the slither, nowadays we might think, that's a bit disappointing. And when we said this, Nabil said, if you think that was disappointing, you should have seen the Rock. He said, we actually heard the director saying, we're going to have to shoot tight on this. And I think as a consequence of the Rock costume, I mean, I've never seen it in full. I've never seen a photo of it in full. I think they must have all been burned or something. But as a consequence of him being disappointed with this lead monster for this scene, it's really well shot. You don't get to see it properly. He's finally shooting it like he's shooting Alien. And as a consequence, it looks terrifying because all you see is like a little eye at one point and a flash of claw, and you hear the growling, and then it's dead. So out of a potential disaster in his last story, Ron Jones gives us a really good monster moment.
My beef, such as it was with Ron Jones, is that he is very static behind the camera. When he's doing a scene, there are never zooms, there are never pans. He just nails the camera to the wall and walks away in satisfaction as the scene is playing out in one dimension. And when I was doing the entire classic series as a pilgrimage, and this is between October 2020 and November 2021, live blogging about 2 episodes per night over on the now defunct Twitter, it is quickly obvious when you watch the sequence that Ron Jones as a director is much less visually inclined than anybody else who was working during the Davison era. Even Peter Moffat is, F.W. Murnau compared to Ron Jones. I found his stories visually frustrating. As you say, the visual effects in Mindwarp, even if the paint box is a little too oversaturated, as you also said, I think it's at least trying for a visual look for a cave-bound Dark Doctor Who story. There's a lot going on in Mindwarp that is visually appealing, even though, from a director's point of view, Ron Jones typically didn't work in that milieu. Frontios is another dark, dreary story set in caves, and even the outdoor sequences are shot indoors. And the reason Frontios works is because of the dialogue and the Paddy Kingsland score. So you're right, Mindwarp may very well be his best performance on the show as a director.
There's a lovely little there's a lot of this that I'm thinking, I don't even know if it was Ron Jones making the decisions on these things, because I would imagine he didn't understand how the paint box thing works, so he has to rely on somebody else doing it for him. And he's not doing the lighting, somebody else is doing the lighting. And there's loads of little things, but at least he's turned the lights down in areas where they're not supposed to be saturated with light. So the cave sequences look scary. The Lucosa's quite scary when he first pops out. But I can't remember which cliffhanger it is. It's either the second or third of the... No, it must be the second one. It's when Ikanos pulls a gun on the Doctor.
Right.
And there is a little strobe light that flashes across his face before the credits crash in. So it looks like Ikanos fired the gun. And it's just a tiny little flash of light across Colin's face. And I think it's possibly from an accident. It's possibly just the timing of the lights that the set designer had created and the lighting director had created. But maybe it was just lucky, but it's one of the best of the zoom in on Colin's face cliffhangers that we get in the entire season.
Well, as we are endeavoring to make Doctor Who literature episodes fit into a 1 hour time slot, I think this is a good logical stopping point for the conversation. Unless you have other things in your notes that we haven't talked about. We've discussed the Liverpool fan group in the 80s. We've discussed Ian Martyr. We have discussed the initial reactions to Mindwarp on television in 1986 versus how we view it now. We've talked about Ron Jones, Brian Blessed, Colin Baker. Anything else in your notes, Jim?
I mean, there's plenty that we'd rush through. Like we'd point out the Pteroleptil, who's the ambassador. That sequence is better in the book.
The walk-on for Deep Roy.
Yeah. And obviously there's another mentor who in the book is called Marn, and he has more to do in the book. Kiv does have a bulbous cranium in the book, and there's a lot more about the tribes and the marsh that they all come from. I think what I'd say is if you actually enjoy the TV show to any degree, the book is better. And surely that's all we could ask for. Even if you're the sort of person who likes them all to be consistent, it is frustrating that because it came so late, the design of the outer cover of the book is so inconsistent with all of the others, considering they went to such an effort to make the previous three have a consistent design. What a shame. But apart from that, it's a beautiful design. It's a beautiful painting from Alister Pearson, albeit with the Sylvester McCoy logo across it. And with the Trial of a Time Lord as a subtitle rather than as a flash across the corner. But that's 3 out of the 4 books this season to have an Alister Pearson cover. And wouldn't we have loved him to do Vervoids instead? Maybe you wouldn't have been in so much trouble with your wife when you left a copy of it on your table there.
We still, 2 years later, joke about that cover and how it is completely inappropriate to be seen in public. That book was turning up in our apartment. You'd open up a cabinet, the book would fall out. You try and go to sleep, that book is on your pillow. We were using that book as a weapon against each other for a good 3 or 4 weeks.
I should have mentioned as well, Christopher Ryan's in this, isn't he?
Yes, who later appears in the Sontaran Stratagem / The Poison Sky, and I believe he was also in the season finale of that season as well. He's
played lots of Sontarans, yeah. But it's just funny that at this point he was pretty much famous for being in The Young Ones, where Alexei Sale, who was in Revelation of the Daleks, was also from. And he'd done a little 6-part sitcom called Small Problem. But after this, he becomes, I think, internationally more famous as one of Eddie's husbands in Absolutely Fabulous. And I wonder if people who are watching the modern series of Doctor Who actually recognised Eddie's husband from Absolutely Fabulous in that Sontaran costume, because I bet they didn't.
And this is where my limited knowledge of non-Doctor Who UK programming causes the conversation to grind to a halt because I have no obvious response to that.
That's okay. All the gays listening are clicking the fingers going, yes! They know what I'm talking about.
We have inadvertently brought the Trial of a Time Lord book season full circle. My audio essay on the novelization will follow in a couple of minutes. But it is interesting to note that the same way that the production of Trial was done out of order and higgledy-piggledy, the books also come out of sequence. Terror of the Vervoids, which is the third of 4 stories, is released first, episode 124 of this podcast. So Jim was the guest on the first and last books in the cycle. Then came The Mysterious Planet, episode 126 of this podcast with Dr. Stacy Smith. And then after that came The Ultimate Foe, which is episode 131, where I had 2 separate guests to discuss. And then finally, quite some time later, we have this episode 139, covering Mindwarp. It is the second story out of the 4-story cycle. But of course, it comes out last, quite some time after all the others, and it is the only one of the 4 books that does not have the Trial of a Time Lord logo, the Gallifreyan seal, which appears on the other 3 books.
I've said in the past that, and I know it's inappropriate to use this sort of language, but It's how we felt at the time. I think we survived Trial of a Time Lord. It disappointed us in so many ways because we'd waited so long for it, and it was just not that special. It was just more of the same. In fact, it was a little bit less of the same, wasn't it? And I know a lot of fandom felt disappointed. And I'm wondering if this is why all three of the modern series showrunners have tried to sort of erase the memory of it by doing their own version of Gallifrey is corrupt. Because if you think of it, Russell's done it.
Right.
Bringing back Rassilon. Stephen did it. And Chris did it with the whole Tecteon and the Flux and all that sort of stuff, the backstory of the pre-Hartnell Doctors. All three of them who survived Trial of a Time Lord couldn't let it go.
I will not speak ill of the new series, having already done so earlier during this hour. But when you have a season like this, which ends the way that it did, it's going to leave a psychic wound across the mind of the viewer. So for me, the definitive version of Mindwarp is not the TV version, but it is rather, of course, the novelization, which ends with a different and better ending for Peri and Arcanos, but we'll talk more about that after the break. Jim, thank you once again for saving this show.
And hey, listeners, listen out for some songs in a few weeks' time.
And of course, go to the YouTube channel and watch Jim's hand-designed videos.
What do you want?
The Mentor Sylph is a conspiracy against the Lord Gibbs. You are a spy for the Alphans.
What? No! Stop that!
All right, we're alone now. We can talk.
Oh, Doctor. I thought that brain transference pulse would make you crazy.
I'm your friend, you know that.
I was beginning to wonder.
I'm here to help you.
Do I get out of this?
By telling me who the Alphans are that are leading the unrest and where they can be annihilated.
What?
Tell me!
Alphys, I don't know.
Answer me. The tide is on the turn. Unless you want to add your own despair to the sea of sorrows, I suggest that you tell me everything.
Just like in the old days, there's nothing more enjoyable than watching people suffer.
Doctor Who, The Trial of a Time Lord, Mindwarp, written by Philip Martin, televised as The Trial of a Time Lord, parts 5 through 8, teleplay by Philip Martin, televised in October 1986, paperback release date June 15, 1989, target book number 139, cover artist Alister Pearson. Accused of crimes against the inviolate laws of evolution, the Doctor is on trial for his life. The sinister prosecutor, the Valeyard, presents the High Council of Time Lords with the second piece of evidence against the Doctor, a dramatic adventure on the planet Thoros Beta, which led to the renegade Time Lord's summons to the Court of Inquiry. But as the Doctor watches the scenes on the Matrix, he is puzzled by what he sees. His behavior is not as he remembers. Only one thing is certain. On the evidence of the Matrix, the Doctor is surely guilty as charged. Reading the first chapter of the Mindwarp novelization is nearly a relief. So soon after reading the interminably long run-on sentences of Philip Martin's previous book, Vengeance on Varos, it is pleasing to read sentences that are relatively simple. Still, though, one gets the sense that Martin and Prose are estranged lovers, forced to work together in the same office, each unsure how to react to the other anymore and preferring to generally avoid one another, because any head-to-head encounter winds up in an argument. The courtroom scene bears little resemblance to what we saw on television, with new character names, and the Inquisitor no longer dressed in white. A planet is said to loom over the Thoros beaten horizon like a prodigious orange. Martin's thesaurus gets a workout. The words fibrous and bilious also appear in Chapter 1, though I'm less confident that these are used correctly. Alliterative passages like process of pacification progress inspire less confidence in the author's hands. I do like that, of all the millions of books ever published, this is the only one, I can say to a reasonable degree of literary certainty, to include the line, quote, with a bombardment of pickled brains falling on them. And Martin's run-on sentences here are decidedly shorter than the ones in his previous book. There are still some doozies, of course. Quote, black uniformed guards watch the miserable line of men and women and children move towards the screening center where an aged medical officer, Marn, sat at the controls of a body scanner that could assess the state of health of a body almost instantly. Whew. Another one. Quote, the cries of a Krontep king's lament for a lost love filled the underground passage with its sonorous, heartfelt cry of farewell. The most important part of the book, though, is its last chapter. Mindwarp on TV was a confusing mess, never properly explained. Specifically, we never learn how much of what we saw on Thoros Beta was real, and how much was the Valeyard manipulating the Matrix to frame the Doctor. We get a very brief explanation in the finale that Peri survived and became queen to Urkanos, but that wasn't earned on screen, and never felt real. This is what audiences would have heard in October 1986.
You killed Peri?
We had to act. With the discovery that Crozier had made, the whole course of natural evolution throughout the universe would be affected.
But Peri died, Doctor, because you abandoned her. We had to end her life because your negligence had made it impossible for her to live.
Lies. There's something else going on here. The High Council has no right to order Peri's or anyone else's death.
Please, Doctor.
I was taken out of time for another reason, and I have every intention of finding out what it is.
First of all, no. Take it from me, I have a little bit of experience with judicial proceedings. Once the judge makes herself a party to the case, like the Inquisitor does here, the entire proceeding is invalid. All of those lines should have been assigned to the Valeyard and not to the Inquisitor. But again, this was disposable television, meant to be watched once. Perhaps the authors or the producers or the actors or the director didn't have as much experience with judicial proceedings. None of that works for me. But, back to the book. Fandom did not like that explanation as to what happens to Peri, as described in Part 14 of Trial of a Time Lord. See our previous episode on the Ultimate Foe, episode 131 of this podcast. Most notably, Matt Jones spent the whole 1996 new adventure novel Bad Therapy undoing it, and having the Doctor confronted with what a mess he made by never coming back to rescue Peri, not from Crozier's surgery, but from the Time Lord's arranged marriage. Now Martin fixes that, number one, by adding a line on page 134, which you won't hear on the TV broadcast or any deleted scenes, that the Doctor was only pretending to help the Mentors. More important than that, in the last chapter, we learn that Peri and Urkanos are not sent back to Krontep, but to 1990s Los Angeles, where he becomes a pro wrestler, where his fans become Vroomniks, and Peri becomes his manager. With the WWF, now the WWE, becoming billion-dollar business in the 1990s, with Jesse Ventura becoming governor of Minnesota, and Mick Foley becoming a best-selling novelist, and with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson becoming an always reliable and sometimes charming A-list star. Well, there's also Linda McMahon. We're not going to talk about Linda McMahon. But Martin's choice for Peri and Urkanos' fate becomes, in hindsight, not a cheap gag, but a truly happy ending, and a fittingly bright and sunny future for the two lovebirds. No bad therapy needed. You know what I say to that? Vroomnik.
Oklahoma, take one.
And action!
Hey, Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain.
Hold it, cut.
Did I come in too soon?
No, forgetful. You came in at you came in at the right time, but you sang the wrong thing. You see, you sang Oklahoma, and you're supposed to sing Oklahoma.
That is a clip from Sesame Street in 1989. What do we talk about when we don't talk about Doctor Who? A couple of years ago, I devoted a whole episode, Jason's Improbable Library, to my childhood reading obsessions before I discovered the Target novelizations. Now I could just as easily do an episode on my television obsessions before Doctor Who. I have tried to figure out where my interest in science fiction came from. My father tells of watching Sid and Marty Krofft's trippy sci-fi adjacent Saturday morning show Sigmund and the Sea Monsters with me when I was a baby. I discovered Star Wars and Superman and Batman in the late 1970s. All of that helped. The Muppets, of course, have been part of my life since before I can remember, probably from Sesame Street first. The Muppet movie, the first and still the best, second place is far, far in the distance, in my estimation, was released in the States in June 1979. My parents took me to that in the theater. We arrived late and came in somewhere around Gonzo's balloon flight, which terrified me, as did Mel Brooks's cameo torturing Kermit later in the movie. Then we stuck around and watched all of the next showing. This is what life was like in the 70s. The Muppet Show, as far as I can tell, I started watching during its final season, broadcast on CBS's New York affiliate, helpfully called WCBS, Channel 2 in 1981, airing at 7:30 p.m. after Walter Cronkite's legendary newscast. He retired shortly thereafter. The Muppet Show was definitely appointment viewing for the whole family, though of course that wound up being the final season, so I don't recall how long we would have done that. Probably not more than a few months, but it certainly felt longer at the time. And I'm here to tell you that Pigs in Space definitely excited my young imagination for Voyage Beyond the Stars. Now my daughter Callie, who's been on this show several times, has an eclectic and impressively deep musical taste, even if I do say so myself. She discovered Blondie last year, and that wound up pretty high on her Spotify Wrapped for 2025. For fun, I decided to show her Debbie Harry's Season 5 Muppet Show appearance from 1981. Shortly after that, we went to see Sam Raimi's Send Help in the theaters, which both opens and closes with Blondie songs, so we couldn't have timed that better. Pigs in Space is one of the skits during the Debbie Harry episode, and Callie had never heard of Pigs in Space before, and her reaction to the intro was one of shocked laughter. And now, as of February 2026, The Muppet Show is back, for a one-night special anyway, with Sabrina Carpenter as the guest, and executive producer, which I suppose makes her the David Barsky of The Muppet Show. We all watched Muppet Show 2026 as a family earlier this month, all three of us. At the same time, I've been reading the book Funny Boy, a full-length 2024 biography of Richard Hunt, one of the original 5 Muppet performers. I have a lot of childhood memories with Richard Hunt's voice in them. You heard him opposite Jim Henson in a 1989 sketch a minute ago. There's nothing funnier for me than Hunt's 1970 Sesame Street Don Music sketches opposite Jim Henson's Kermit, where in this series Don Music forgets the key rhyming word to a nursery rhyme, or in one giddy instance the Sesame Street theme song, and Kermit eggs him on with the wrong word, causing Don to completely rewrite the song before Kermit reveals that he knew the right word the whole time. There were several of these, all punctuated by Don Music banging his head against the piano keyboard and shouting, "I'll never get it right, never!" Richard Hunt was also the voice of Waldorf to Jim Henson's Statler, the greatest double act not written by Robert Holmes, and the voice of Scooter, and the voice of Janice. So he was all over Sesame Street, and The Muppet Show, and Fraggle Rock, and the first 3 Muppet movies. Richard Hunt was openly gay and died of AIDS in January 1992, not much longer after Jim Henson. I highly recommend this book. The only original 5 Muppet performer left is Dave Goelz, who still voices Gonzo and his other characters. Check out his recent re-recording of the song I'm Going to Go Back There Someday on YouTube, a masterful elegiac reinterpretation of his 1979 Muppet movie song. So there is a Family Guy skit from about 20 years ago where Stewie is afraid that he has a terminal disease and bemoans the wait-and-see approach, comparing it to the death of Jim Henson with the punchline, "And now we have wrong-sounding Muppets." This is followed by cameos for Kermit and the Swedish Chef and Fozzie, all with completely different voices. Now, with Henson and Hunt being the first two Muppet performers to pass away, all of the Kermit and Statler and Waldorf segments for me do have a wrong-sounding Muppets vibe. No sooner had I gotten used to Steve Whitmire as the new Kermit than did Disney kick him to the curb under disputed circumstances which do not make Disney look good. So most of the 2026 Muppet Show does have what you would call wrong-sounding Muppets, but Richard Hunt passed away 34 years ago, and Jim Henson almost 36. The Muppets are an ongoing franchise, and recasting the voices is a necessary part of life, as Big Finish is also discovering for Doctor Who over in the audio range. This is a problem for me, personally, because I'm old. It should not be a problem for anybody else watching the Muppets who is young at heart. All of which is a long way of saying the newest Muppet Show revival is really good, completely in the spirit of the original, with the same characters doing the same things in the same theater. The only difference is there are more humans this time around, with a strenuously unfunny Seth Rogen cameo and a much more satisfying role for Maya Rudolph. Nostalgia can be a dangerous thing, especially during Russell T Davies' 2023 to 2025 run on Doctor Who, but when it comes to the Muppets, the 2026 reinterpretation of the 1977 to 1981 show hits all the right notes, no significant reinterpretation needed. While there was no Pigs in Space segment this time, one can only hope that the new Muppet Show gets picked up for a full series, and that's what Callie wants, because other than Debbie Harry, the Season 5 guest cast list was mostly random nobodies to her, well, random nobodies and Johnny Cash, and she wants a Muppet Show that speaks to her generation, as much as Sabrina Carpenter's song Manchild speak to her personally. So come on, Muppets, come on, Disney+. Yes, the Doctor Who contract expired without renewal, but please do right by the Muppets. With that being said, we'll see you in 2 weeks, as we're going back, far back in time, back to London 1965. And Jeff Goddard will be back as a guest, in between recording episodes of What's in the Box, as we take a flight through eternity alongside the Daleks, and the TARDIS crew, and Frankenstein, and Dracula, and the crew of the Mary Celeste, and everybody's favorite New York City tour guide in The Chase. Thank you for joining me on Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer is David Barsky. Each episode is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed and our YouTube channel is run by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Jim Sangster. This podcast can be found on your podcast app of choice, with all past episodes at creators.spotify.com/pod/show/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.